Namaskar. Uh, I'm delighted to be with you. It is heartening that Swami Vivekananda Cultural Center, Tehran, has organized an exhibition on Baba Sahib Bhimrao Ambedkar, one of the greatest sons of modern India. I'm grateful to Professor Balram Shukla for giving me this opportunity of sharing my thoughts on this great son of India. Ambedkar is talked about personality of today. I don't think, apart from Gandhi, anybody has attracted that much scholarly attention in recent years' time. So it would be better if I do not focus on the details of his life, because those things are quite familiar to most of you. I would refer to some facts of his life, but basically I would be dealing with the vision which Baba Sahib Bhimrao Ambedkar represented. And that is what is most important. Ambedkar's life of 65 years can be divided into 3-4 parts. And all parts are significant and inspiring. Would you imagine that a man could be involved in so many fields of life? He was a great jurist, he was an economist, a social reformer, a political leader, and an anthropologist. And in all these areas, he made an impact. And this becomes very remarkable once we consider that he belonged to that group for which the scholarship was very difficult to achieve. And it is one of the most inspiring stories of modern India, that how a person who belonged to the what is called depressed class or the untouchables could rise to the level of that kind of a scholarship, which can be awe-inspiring. Ambedkar's family was a family of Mahars, in which Ramayana, Mahabharat, the stories which were possible to be shared in a Kabirpanthi family, these things were common. His grandfather was a remarkable man, and his father also was a remarkable man. He played cricket and football, and he was in a job. So, and he wanted Bhimrao to become a special person. He was showing some signs of being a remarkable person. So his father backed him. So he did find some kind of a support from his father and his surrounding, and his teachers were kind to him. So this is how he started the journey. But he later picked up in such a way that he was in a way a remarkable child. There are some stories of his experience of being deprived of a dignified behavior from his schools. Those stories are there, that shows that he was not seen respectably by his colleagues, and it was a very conservative society. You can understand the kind of effect it could have had on Ambedkar. But the man was made to become a remarkable person. He was helped by his teacher, and one of his teachers had the title of Ambedkar, and he liked that teacher so much that he took that title. Actually, his title was Satpal, but he became Ambedkar because of the influence of his teacher. The journey later becomes somewhat more remarkable once his teachers found him special talent, and later on, with some financial assistance from others, he could go to Columbia University for higher studies. And there he became a real Ambedkar, in that sense that he got the environment in which he could become a person with a wide range of interest. He would receive the interest of his remarkable teachers, one of the finest of his time, Bose and others. And thereafter, Ambedkar could pick up like anything. So till 1917, in fact, we can say that during the First World War, he was in America, and he was able to read books which were in circulation in those days. And in those days, Ambedkar actually got the basic ideas about how human dignity is very important, human rights are important. And in that connection, he developed his basic philosophy, whereby he could understand that the lives of untouchables in India needs to be improved, and there is a need to fight for those unfortunate untouchables of India. And he took the responsibility of fighting for those deprived people. India, as we know, was not India of today. 100 years ago, India was still in some kind of influence of conservative system, and caste system was very, very oppressive. So therefore, there were sections of people who felt the pressure, and the certain opportunities were denied to these untouchables. And this man, our hero, Bhimrao Ambedkar, comes from that background. Therefore, he took the responsibility to fight for them. But thinking of that and doing for those unfortunate people are two different things. With degrees, PhD from Columbia and DSc from London School of Economics, with him, as I said, he was very voracious reader, and he had close contacts with most of the remarkable scholars who could give him the confidence that he was able to do justice to world of scholarship. But when he came back in India, he found that it was very difficult for him to fight for the deprived people, untouchables. And in that connection, he got some opportunity because the time was somewhat favorable for a new kind of political work, new kind of mobilization was there, possibility was there. 1917 onwards, depressed classes issues were taken up by Congress and other groups. And by 1924, we find that all the major players of the then political environments were interested in bringing this section of the people into politics to serve their own interest. It is interesting that in 1923-24, three major players, Gandhi, Savarkar, and Ambedkar, all three were trying to address this depressed classes issues in a very remarkable manner. So 1923 onwards, he was very much into the politics and doing politics, working as a lawyer and continuing his studies. All these things were not easy for him. And 1923 onwards, he had a very tough task before him. Although he got support from a number of people, I do not have the time to go into the details of his associates, but what I'm trying to argue is that at that time, he led a movement which was already on. I mean, some people were also trying to uplift the downtrodden people, but he gave them a proper direction. As he was very great scholar, he could relate to the problems of the depressed classes with the problems of all the kind of struggles which were going on at the international level. So he was raising those questions and linking it with the broader questions. And in that connection, he was questioning the approach of Indian National Congress led by Gandhi. He was quick to realize that there is a need to fight for depressed classes in a manner which may not fit in the national movement narrative. So he wanted to raise those questions. He thought, and he was right in that mere national movement, political movement is not enough. We need to fight for the people who are denied the social rights, dignified life. They do not have the opportunity to compete with their own countrymen just because they belong to a particular caste. So he was right in raising the questions related to the depressed classes. And in that connection, he got the opportunity when the Simon Commission came, and thereafter he was seen as one of the most important spokespersons for the deprived and untouchables. His moment came in 1932 when what is famous as Pune Pact came up, and in Pune Pact he could achieve something for his own people. There is a remarkable debate over whether Gandhi was genuinely concerned about the untouchables' life or not, or what was the fight between Ambedkar and Gandhi. Many scholars believe that they were ordinary opponents. They didn't like each other, and so on and so forth. But in my opinion, if you see their interactions, you would find that both these greats appreciated each other. And one scholar, Nagaraj, has shown that both influenced each other. Gandhi was heavily influenced by Ambedkar, and Ambedkar was also influenced by Gandhi. So both of them somewhat changed, although neither of them actually left their own positions. But this is a very interesting kind of exchange, which actually gives us an idea about how in a society the person who is thinking of the benefits of the entire society may come into a kind of clash with a person who is thinking of focusing on rather the interest of a section which is most deprived. It's quite possible that both Gandhi and Ambedkar were right in their own ways. And so this is not a place to talk about the dichotomy or the kind of conflict between these two. We have to understand that both were trying in their own ways. But what is interesting here is that after 1932, he found that he was unable to convince the great Congress leaders that depressed classes needed special attention. So in Indian politics, he was a champion for depressed classes. Indian national movement was basically trying to get independence, and in between we find that there was an emergence of Muslim political interest, and therefore there was some kind of a triangular kind of zone developed in which on the one section we have National Congress, on the other we have Muslim League, and on the third is the depressed class, which was represented by leaders in which obviously Ambedkar was most important. Now this Ambedkar has said many things, nasty things about national leadership, especially Indian National Congress leaders. Sometimes he says that they are all upper caste people. Congress is an upper caste body. But you see, if you closely look at what he wanted to think for the depressed classes. And he wanted to draw the special attention of the Indian great leaders to think that 1/5 of Hindu population was being denied their legitimate and normal opportunities as a human being. This socially deprived people could not be a partner in a national movement. So there was a special need for consideration for these people. You know, when I think of Ambedkar, I think that he was fighting on so many fronts. He was rightly attributed the credit of educating an entire generation. It was not easy for him to convince his poor fellow repressed class people to understand why education is so very important. It was not easy in an environment when he was seen as a person who was only interested in untouchables cause and not for national cause. So he was seen as a person who was sectarian that way, and he was fighting a political battle also. He was organizing, he was making organizations, he was traveling a lot, he was maintaining his family, he was writing, he was reading, everything he was doing just to make a substantial point, and that point was to think about poor untouchables of India, who numbered around 6 crore. And it has to be understood that when India got independence in 1947, 1 out of 5 was not given proper social rights. So in a way, in 47, when we got independence, we have 20% of our population denied social rights. So this is something which is remarkable, and that has to be given due attention. Now, I am not going into the details of how he worked as a member of Bombay Assembly, and then there he raised many issues. He took part in many movements and wrote so many pamphlets just to highlight how inhuman caste system could be, how it is denying the human rights to a large number of people only on the basis of birth, which is absolutely unjust. And no modern person, no human person can support this kind of a system. Still, that system was there, and international movement was going on. So he was legitimate in raising those questions, raising his reservations before the International Congress leaders. And one should understand the agony, pain in doing so. So Ambedkar then turned towards the British government. He expected few things from them. And many of you would not understand why Ambedkar became part of war cabinet. In between 42 and 46, he was part of Viceroy's war cabinet, and he was labor, in charge of labor. And as in charge of labor, he did so many things especially for his untouchable people. Now, if you read the details of his works, and his works are formidable. I mean, more than 21 volumes are there in which you can read his views expressed in different forums and his statements. He was a very good speaker. Now, I would like to suggest that on the basis of those observations, you can have a kind of negative view of Ambedkar. But I think after having spent some time on his writings and some kind of journey among the scholars, one should try to understand that Ambedkar was a person who loved his country. He was not against Hinduism at all. He was not against religion at all. He only wanted Hindus to understand that other people who are also Hindus, they should be treated like human beings. And he was right in doing that. He was opposing certain kind of practices of fellow Hindus which he could not accept as human. Nobody can accept that religion which makes differences between different sections of the same religion people just on the basis of birth. So he was right in doing that. And he was raising questions for the annihilation of caste only to make the society better. So all his pain, all his anguish, all his utterances, sometimes which can be harsh, nasty, which can be considered very bitter, product of a very bitter mind, is to be seen in that context. He tried to make a political alternative. He raised a political organization for depressed classes, and in 1946 he contested. And this is important to note that in that contest, the voters did not support him, and he failed miserably. He was absolutely marginalized in that condition, politically very marginalized. He was not backed by many people, but he was very popular and he was considered the voice of the depressed classes, but he was not very successful. But I would like to draw your attention to a moment which is, in my view, the point to understand the great man properly. In fact, when we think about Ambedkar, we should at least try to look at his life and his works considering three basic points. He was a depressed class leader and a great scholar. It must have been very difficult for him to accept that he was seen as merely the leader of the depressed classes, not the national leader. And he deserved to be seen as a national leader. That is also a pain. He was most educated, most articulate, and a very refined mind. One of the examples which can actually tell us about his greatness as a mind is the point I was referring to. There was a debate going on. Ambedkar is politically marginalized. He lost the election, and he was in no position to dictate something. And so far as politics is concerned, there was a debate. Great Jaikar had made and had advocated some amendment when Jawaharlal Nehru made a very forceful speech, and the amendment was that as Muslim League was not part of that deliberation, we should not think of supporting the proposal without consulting the Muslim League leadership. And at that point, he got an opportunity to speak. And it was expected that as he was fighting against the Congress leadership for years, and he was very bitter, he was seen as somebody who is waging a war against the Congress, he was going to support Jaikar and not the resolution of Jawaharlal Nehru. Then he stood and he spoke few sentences. I cannot resist the temptation of sharing with you what the great man thought at that moment. And that is a testimony that he was a constructive man. He loved his country. He says, I know today we are divided politically, socially and economically. We are in warring camps, and I am probably one of the leaders of a warring camp. But with all this, I am convinced that, given time and circumstances, nothing in the world will prevent the country from becoming one. And with all our castes and creeds, I have not the slightest hesitation in saying that we shall in some form be a united India. This cannot be the expressions of a man who did not love his country. He also added, I have no hesitation in saying that, notwithstanding the agitation of the Muslim League for the partition of India, someday enough light will be dawned upon the Muslims themselves, and they too will begin to think that a united India is better for everybody. This is Ambedkar. At a time when it was expected that he will go with other co-fighters. I mean, Muslim league leaders were also fighting against the Congress leadership. So he could have easily joined, like some other leaders who thought that going with Muslim League would better serve the cause of repressed classes. He was wise enough to realize that to work for the depressed classes does not mean going against the common interest of united India. And that is Ambedkar for me. And that, with all his bitter statements about Gandhi, Jawaharlal Nehru, Rajgopalachari, Sardar Patel, and many others, I think he was raising a valid point. He was fighting in a very democratic manner, and as and when required, he was able to make a comprehensive analysis of the situation and suggest something which was constructive. His great hero was Buddha. Once he said that whatever you can think of my philosophy can be enshrined in 3 words: liberty, equality, and fraternity. And he reminded that I'm not borrowing it from the French Revolution. I take this lesson from my great guru, Gautam Buddha. So he was a man who was, although he was educated and he, you may find it interesting that it is said that his personal collection, he had 50,000 books. And all the time he was in touch with what is going on in the realm of knowledge. But he was wise enough to understand that mere scholarship is not enough. One has to understand religion, one has to understand the tradition and various other things, which he calls wisdom. He always said that mere education is not enough. One needs wisdom. One needs wisdom because without wisdom, and I think wisdom is something which is very interesting term, and he uses it repeatedly when he talks about education. So education is not the end of the journey. You have to be wise. You have to see the society, see the humanity in a way in which you can think of values. Now, why I'm insisting on this point is that, you see, we all know that he was the maker of Constitution, and he was credited with the title Father of Constitution, or the person who drafted the Constitution. He was not very well when he was doing all this important work. He used to work 16 to 18 hours a day for drafting the Constitution in a very poor physical state. His wife has written how difficult it was for him. His wife asked him, "Why are you working so hard?" And he responded by saying that I am repaying my debt to the people of this soil. And these are valuable words. These are extraordinarily important words. You know, I didn't have the opportunity, and I think those things cannot be brought into this discussion. You all are getting ready for seeing the exhibition, which will give you the idea of the various kinds of works he did. I just want to make a humble appeal to all of you who are interested in the life of Ambedkar. I would say that see him in totality, how constructive he was, and how generous he was. I'm using generosity. I'm using generosity, which is not normally associated with Ambedkar, because he is seen as a person who was very bitter. I think if you read him carefully, he was never in support of violence. He was never a very aggressive man. Although sometimes while you read his utterances, you would find that it's a product of a very restless and aggressive mind. But in my opinion, I think he was a very reasonable man, very wise man. If you see in him in totality, he always said, and he has a contribution so far as his understanding of Buddhism is concerned. I've already told you that he was inspired by Gautam Buddha. He said that there was a time when he was asked about why he is not a Marxist. You are not a Marxist. Then he explained that I believe not in coercion. I believe in persuasion. Somebody who is a believer in persuasion, not coercion, he must be seen as a person who wanted things to change, but not in a violent manner, in a manner which can make people understand. Even the oppressor, even the side which is doing injustice, that side also should realize that what they are doing is not good. And this change of heart, or a kind of understanding that injustice should not be done to anybody, that is the moral of the story of his entire work. This is what Gandhi also thought, that unless you change your opponent's attitude towards you or subject, you're not making a real change. A real change only comes if your opponent against whom you're fighting also gets transformed. And that is why I think the paths of Gandhi, the paths of Ambedkar, and path of any wise person meet somewhere. It is up to us to see beyond the conflicts here and there at the level of words, to see how these greats are helping us to understand that we need to change for better, to make a better tomorrow, to feel that we have a responsibility towards those who are not as powerful as us. There are powerful people and there are not so powerful people. It is the responsibility of wise people to make understand the powerful people that those who are not powerful are also human beings and the power should be shared with them. And this is the message of Ambedkar. The man got only 65 years time. I wish somebody could have, he could have get more time to work for it. He thought of women, he thought of depressed classes people all his life. Many things, if you read his writings, you would find that he was ahead of his time. When he died, he was not, I'm not mentioning that he was the law minister and he was part of that famous bill which actually transformed the life of women in modern India. I'm not going into all those details. Only thing I would like to remind you that he was not that important when he died in 1956. After his death, decades after his death, Ambedkar becomes more important. And now at this time, he is the man who is most talked about among all the greats of modern India. Why? Because people of India have now understood that rights are for everyone and no social discrimination should be possible and allowable. It should not be allowed constitutionally or by people of India. So India stands united because India has appreciated these values. And now Ambedkar's message and dream is coming true. We are moving towards a society where these discriminations should not be part of our system. Caste system should collapse. Annihilation of caste is inevitable in the process. It must go. This kind of a system must not exist in modern India. Otherwise, we will not be able to make ourselves powerful as a nation, as a civilization. And that is where, whenever we think of that possibility, we think of Ambedkar as a shining star of Indian history. I salute to the man. I close by saying that the vision of Ambedkar is the most important legacy of scholar, politicians, generation of its time.